Welcome back to Module 4 about welcome sequences. And here in Lesson 2, we're talking about the topics for your welcome sequence emails. In other words, what are you going to talk about in these emails? And because we've already talked about the purpose, you probably have some ideas, but we're going to talk about it specifically. So here in Lesson 2, you're going to learn the emails you'll want to include in a welcome sequence, the 6 core email topics, and how to identify the topics that you'll actually include in your welcome sequence. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Let's go ahead and dive in. Now, remember from last lesson, your welcome sequence is about helping subscribers get to know a few things and make a couple of decisions. So picking the right topics helps with both pieces of the puzzle. In other words, if you actually cover the right topics in your emails, you'll naturally do these things. You'll naturally give them the information they need and help them make their decision. So other than potentially having an opening and closing email, and I have that in my sequence now, but other than those, your emails will generally fall into 6 broad topic areas. And let's go ahead and talk about those. So here are the 6 topics: your origin story, secondary freebies, core values, your content, social media, and your products. And we're going to talk about those in order. But now, if you look at these, you'll actually kind of notice that they tend to follow kind of the questions we were talking about the things that they need to know from the last lesson about who you are, about what you stand for, about how you can serve them, etc. So we're going to kind of go through them in order. Now, you don't have to use every email type, but if you have a basis for each type of email, you should probably use it. In other words, what I mean by that is that if you have content, if you have a secondary freebie, if you have all of these things, you're probably going to want to include an email or two about that topic. So I just wanted to say that. But don't feel like if right now you, for example, don't have anything to talk about in one of those areas that you have to. You're only going to use the email types that fit your business. So let's go down the list in order. The first type I talked about is the origin story. This email is an introduction to who you are through the lens of how you came to serve people like your new subscribers. Now, this is a topic, the idea of an origin story is too broad for me to talk about like in depth here. Here on this page, I've got some recommended resources about where you could go if you're not familiar with the concept of an origin story. But the basic concept behind this is, why is it that you are positioned where you are today to serve your new subscribers? Now, just as an aside, oftentimes your origin story will be that you are a few steps ahead of them on the journey. And so it's the story of you going through the struggles that they're probably struggling with right now and how you've overcome them, and now how you are helping people to do the same. That's the traditional origin story. Now, my case was different, obviously, when I was serving people about the legal stuff exclusively. And so if you are a professional who is professionally licensed, it's a slightly different version of an origin story. Your origin story will be about how it was that you took that professional expertise, what led you to take that credential or whatever it is, and serve the specific people that you serve today. And you'll see examples of this in the swipe that you'll see in some future lessons. But that's your origin story in a nutshell. Now, this is an email that you should definitely include, and it should usually be the first substantive email that you send, because generally they should know who you are and how it is that you got to the point of serving them before just about anything else. So in my current sequence, it is the second email that goes out. The first email happens to be an introductory email. So it is the first substantive email in my current welcome sequence. And it generally should be in yours as well. So at this point, it's time to take action. This lesson, we've got a great workbook. go to the workbook, download it, and craft the basic flow of your origin story. Now, in the workbook, I'm not asking you in the actual workbook itself to write the entire origin story, but write what are the high points of how you got to be positioned to be able to serve your new subscribers now. So talk about your struggles, talk about, how you overcame them and how you now help other people do the same thing. So this is what you want to lay out in that workbook. So that's the first kind of email that you're going to want to include in your welcome sequence. The next topic is secondary freebies. And I mentioned this before in the context of a nurture sequence. Now, if you have additional freebies that will interest all new subscribers, it's a good idea to include an email giving those freebies to all of your subscribers. Now, you could do it in your nurture sequence, especially if it's a freebie that not everyone will want. But if you have a freebie that you believe most everybody coming in from different places on different freebies would like to have this really good kind of additional thing, you've got additional resource that normally people would have to sign up for, you're going to want to go ahead and include an email in your welcome sequence that just goes ahead and gives them access to it. Now, how you do that technically, often you'll set an automation. So if they click on a link, it will automatically add them to a membership area if you have to, or if it's a downloadable guide, you literally just have a link that they can download things. Now, you'll see an example of this in my old welcome sequence, which you have swiped for here in this module, where I gave people access to my Online Genius Academy, which was a training academy of training videos about the legal stuff for online entrepreneurs. It was a broad freebie, not the kind of thing that made sense to bring people in on very much, but it was the kind of thing that anyone who came in on one of my freebies was likely to want. And so, it was something that we wanted to go ahead and give to my people, and we put it in the welcome sequence. Now, what you're doing when you do this is you're providing kind of value. You're establishing yourself as someone who serves first. When you build that value and show them more value and give them more, you're going to go ahead and establish yourself as that trusted person that they believe in. So if it's already a freebie that you give away, you might as well include it. Now, again, you don't want to go overboard. If you've got 57 freebies, you don't want to include all 57 in your welcome sequence. You want to identify the most important, the ones that most people will want, and maybe have one or two in your welcome sequence. So now it's time to take action. Go to the workbook and identify any secondary freebies that you believe are broadly applicable that almost everyone will want, and put a note in the workbook so you'll know that you're going to want to include that in your welcome sequence. So that's how you're going to want to go through that. Now let's go to the next topic area, which is your core values. You should stand for things in your business, and you should tell subscribers what they are. Now, again, I am not talking about taking political stands necessarily or anything like that on hot button issues. But what I mean is that there should be core things that you believe in related to what you do and what you teach that people know. And if you haven't established core values for your business, now is the time. You might as well go through this process, and it's something that will evolve over time. But what I will tell you is that you're going to want to have core values that are kind of public facing, but then as you build your team, you'll want to have like internal core values. And a lot of those will be the same. But you need to start establishing those now. The sooner the better. So to try to figure it out, ask what you believe and what you want your business to be known for. Ask yourself those questions and you can come up with it. Now, to give you an example so that you really have a sense of what I'm talking about, here are the 7 core values that I set out in the Fans First Society. They're the core values that I want my business to be known for. That business should be fun, that I serve first, more cowbell, which we've talked about. It was all about adding more of myself to the brand. that I do the unscalable, that we will be a cheerleader and support people, not a negative Nelly, that we keep it simple, stupid, because simple is better than complicated, and that we focus on what matters. So those are what I want to be known for, but you'll see, if you see this list, you've probably heard me talk about every single one of these, or at least do every one of these things. So you get a sense how I distilled these core values from what I'm doing and my approach to marketing and what I'm teaching people in business and how to build online businesses. So again, those are my core values. They're not yours. I'm not saying you adopt these necessarily, but what I'm saying is this gives you a sense. So you can take this and start thinking about your core values if you don't have them yet or haven't written them down. Now, once you've identified your core values, you're going to write an email about at least a couple of your most important core values. Now, you can do this a couple of ways. One, you could have an email that simply identifies multiple of them. And if you have your core values set out somewhere, you could send people to those core values and into that resource. For example, and you'll see this in the swipe, I have an email in my welcome sequence now. I believe it's the one that is about radical giving, which is now how I talk about serve first. And it then links to a podcast episode where I laid out my core values, why they're important, why I believe in them, etc. So it's a way of indoctrinating people, letting people know what I believe in. Now, another way to do it is, let's say you had 3 core values. You might have 3 different emails, 1 per core value. And what you'll see in my welcome sequence now, in the swipe that is to come, even though I have that one email that actually sends people to a podcast episode, the Radical Giving podcast, the Radical Giving email, I also have a separate email that talks about more cowbell because I believe that is so important that they need to know it. And some of the other ones, that business should be fun, you kind of pick up with the way I write all of my emails. People get a sense that I believe that by reading my emails generally. So you'll see that in the swipe to give you a sense of how you do this. So now to the workbook, identify your core values. If you haven't picked them yet, pick them. You need to figure out what those are and then pick the ones to include in the welcome email. So figure out how you're going to do this. Are you going to do one email that talks about them all? Are you going to have 3 different emails? Whatever it is, put those in the workbook so you know what you're going to be doing. So that is your core values. Now, from there, we're going to start shifting to topics that are about how you serve and how you can help your audience. So one of those is your content. If you are creating content on a regular basis, you should tell new subscribers about it, right? They may not know that you have a podcast, a blog, a video show, whatever it is. If you're putting out that content, you should tell your new subscribers about it. So one option is to have a single email that links to your greatest hits. And in the swipe files in this module, there's 2 different ones. In the older swipe file, you'll see this is what I did. I had a single email that talked about my podcast and had links to kind of greatest hits. And by greatest hits, it was some of the most downloaded episodes, but also some that I thought were important to include. Like, for example, when I had a big name on my podcast early on, I was going to include that as a credibility builder. So that's one way to go. Now, another option is to have multiple emails that send subscribers to individual pieces of content. That's what my new welcome sequence does. For example, I have the Radical Giving email that you'll see in the swipe file that sends people to the podcast episode about my beliefs. I then have a separate email that talks about content and how content is important because that's one of the things I believe, and sends them to an episode where I had one of my friends on to talk about developing a content strategy. And I think there are more episodes that link to podcasts. There's one that links to episode 101 where I talked about how you can keep it simple. I mean, where you don't need ninja tactics. So what I've done is now kind of linked to different episodes throughout in a more organic way rather than saying, hey, I got a podcast, go listen to it. No, I have the emails and then link to an individual episode about that email. So if the email spurred their interest, they're likely to go click on that particular episode and go check it out. So that's another way to do it. So to the workbook, identify the core content you want to send your new subscribers to. So figure out what are, like if you had a podcast, it'd be what are the episodes that I want to highlight? If you have a blog post, what are blogs? What are the blog posts I want to send people to? Same thing with a video show. Just identify what that is so you will know which pieces of content you want to include, whether it's a single email or multiple emails when you get to the writing stage. Now, the next topic is social media. You can and should invite new subscribers to your groups or to follow you on social media, assuming that social media is an important part of your overall strategy. Generally, only use this to send them to the most important piece of your social media strategy. In other words, you don't want to tell them to follow you on Pinterest, to follow you on Instagram, to follow you on Facebook, to do whatever you do on TikTok. You don't want to do all that. You want to say, what is the most important part of my social media strategy, and send them there. In my welcome sequence, I send them to my free group, because my free group on Facebook is, in my view, the most important part of my overall social media strategy. It's kind of the hub of the spokes of the other social media stuff. So that's where I'm going to send them. One thing, one call to action about social media generally. Whatever the most important one is for you, that's where you'll send them. So to the workbook, pick your social media call to action. Figure out what are you going to ask them to do. Are you going to say, follow me on Instagram? Because that's, for example, where you spend your time. Are you going to send them to a Facebook group? Because that's what you do. Are you going to send them to Pinterest, which isn't really social, but you might say, hey, follow me on Pinterest. Whatever it is, pick that one social media call to action that you want people to take. Now we're going to talk about the last topic. If you haven't yet talked about the products you have to offer, your welcome sequence is a great place to plant a seed about your signature product or products. In other words, you should tell people what you have to offer. Now, if you have 15 offers, we can talk about separately whether you should have 15 offers, but you're not going to talk about all of it. You're going to pick the most important, the ones that you believe are most critical to kind of moving your business forward, and you're going to talk about those. And you're going to have an email about those, and you're going to give a call to action so that people know, hey, I can help you out with this. And again, if it is something that's available all the time, you can literally just send them to the sales page where you have it. If it's not something that's evergreen, you have a waitlist page, and you send them to the waitlist page of the product, and then they get on the waitlist. They're kind of ready, and you can go from there. So that's how you're going to do this email. You just want them to know what it is that you can help them with. So to the workbook, identify the products you want to highlight, and it could be one or it could be multiple, but identify what those are that you want to highlight in your welcome sequence. And then you'll kind of know what it is to do it. So the key lesson takeaway here is if you followed along and done the work, and you probably haven't done the work yet, I admit that, go back, rewind, and do the work now. Go to the workbook, work through all this, and identify all the topics. When you do that, you're going to know what emails you're going to need to write as part of your welcome sequence. Because what you're going to do is go through that workbook, and you're going to go through and say, okay, well, I said I need to talk about these 3 things in this area, this topic here, these 4 here, etc. And then all of a sudden, you have a list of what to include in your welcome sequence. So you've done the work basically now of identifying all the emails you're going to include in your welcome sequence. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to talk quickly about the 2 types of welcome sequence and how to decide whether to use a greatest hits welcome sequence and what to do if you don't yet have greatest hits to use. So I'll see you in the next lesson.